Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, covering for Darren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you are asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussion providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests will provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected with us as the Social Justice Forum starts now. Welcome back. Despite Mayor Adams commending the NYPD for reducing certain crimes and dubbing New York the safest city in the world, a critical issue remains overlooked. Homicides resulting from intimate partner violence are on the rise, particularly affecting Black and brown women. Shockingly, intimate partner fatalities surged by 29.2% from 2021 to 2022, which is the second largest increase in New York City's intimate partner fatality rates in a decade. Joining us now is the Vice President of Government Affairs of the Urban Resource Institute, Lauren Schuster. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Kibin. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Now, I want to delve right into this because this is a very,
Absolutely.
serious topic. And just from the intro alone, I learned so much. The report released by the NYC Domestic Violence Fatality Review Committee reveals a significant increase of 29.2% in intimate partner fatalities in the one-year period between 2021 to 2022. Can you help us understand the key factors contributing to this alarming rise?
Absolutely. And I think that's the question on the top of everybody's mind right now. Before we dive right into it, I also want to clarify that the increase is even more stark in the Bronx, where DV fatalities have increased by 57% between 2021 and 2022. And in Brooklyn, they've increased by a startling 225%. So it's even worse in both of those two boroughs. And I think everybody is looking for the silver bullet, the main driver of this spike. And I think it's far more complicated than looking to any one cause as the single driver here. I think it would make our work as advocates so much easier if there was one cause that we could point to, then we could just invest a ton of resources. But I think it's complex and there are myriad issues contributing to this spike. In part, we see that intimate partner violence, it's cyclical. So there are increases that ebb and flow over time. And there's some of that that's contributing to this increase. But if you look through the Fatality Review Committee report, which we have done at length since it's been released, you see that the communities with the highest levels or the highest increases across the city are also the ones that experience or have historically experienced great levels of disinvestment. These are communities that are struggling and have historically struggled to be seen. They are communities with higher overall rates of violence. They are communities with high rates of income inequality. And so we are seeing that a lack of priority in these neighborhoods has perchance driven some of this increase for sure.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, Mayor Adams has praised the NYPD just for crime decreases. But now that we're kind of looking at it with this lens on it, how would you assess the city's overall safety considering this specific and critical issue?
I think that's a really important question. URI, Urban Resource Institute, we're the largest provider of temporary housing for DV survivors and their families in the entire country. So everything we look at, everything we think about is through the lens of providing and creating safety for our survivors and their families as they are working to rebuild their lives following a domestic violence situation. And so for us, it could be that the entire city is the safest it's ever been. And whether that's true, it's for other people to debate. But for us, the most important thing is that for folks who are experiencing violence at home, the city is not a safe place. In fact, it is less safe than it was in the past. And that's alarming.
Now, I want to touch on the important fact of that Black and Brown women are seeing these high numbers at a disproportionate rate compared to other groups and communities of women. What systemic issues or lack of resources might be contributing to this trend?
I mean, I think the report leans right into this right at the outset. It talks about the fact that Black women and Hispanic women are disproportionately impacted by domestic violence and are experiencing higher rates of homicide, domestic violence homicide. And that is a really scary statistic. I think they're these communities in particular often feel overlooked or invisible. And it is crucial that when we are talking about what is driving domestic violence, that we really focus on the fact that it is these two particular groups that are experiencing the highest rates, the highest increases, and that we include their voices in developing solutions. You know, the Fatality Review Committee report, I think for URI and for many of the advocates and survivors who are working on this, shouldn't be the end point. It should be the beginning of an ongoing conversation. And so the goal for us would be to bring together a task force of sorts with elected officials and city and state agencies, advocates, survivors, community leaders in these hardest hit areas to really research on the ground what's contributing to this alarming increase in the Bronx in particular and citywide, and then to develop solutions that are created, driven, led by the people who are being impacted the most.
And that's so great that you brought that up because I wanted to kind of expand on that a little bit more on how can policy responses be tailored to address the specific needs of these communities, and what does that actually look like? Because I think a lot of people they have the idea of like, okay, this is what we need to do, or maybe they'll do the research, but what is that extra step that's going to make the community feel, honestly, because it's such a sensitive topic, comfortable and open with, kind of dealing with this and talking about it.
I think that's such an important question because we've come a long way in the way that we talk about and approach domestic violence and intimate partner violence, but there's still a significant stigma that exists around this work and about being somebody who has experienced domestic violence as a witness, as a victim, or even as somebody who's caused harm. And so, one of the things that URI really focuses on is trying to remove that stigma. We are working from a client centered, survivor centered approach. Everything we do is trauma informed. And the goal is to be culturally responsive, not just competent, but responsive. And in responding to the community, it means that we need to include them in the conversation and let them lead the discussion.
Now, the report indicates a proposed decrease in funding to the sector providing services to survivors of IPV, intimate partner violence, and their families. In light of the rising fatalities, how do you view the potential impact of these cutbacks on the ability to address and prevent intimate partner violence?
I think there are real opportunities to make investments in programming um, that have the potential to really reduce violence and make communities safer. Here at URI we work with young people to teach them about um, how to identify the warning signs of intimate partner violence and how to build healthy relationships. We know the research shows that abuse is learned, and that is a very sad thing to think about, but it's also empowering because if it's learned, it could also be unlearned. And if we work with the youth right away in these hardest hit communities, then we really have the ability to sort of change those cycles, to interrupt them, and to recreate them with healthy relationship skills. And so rather than look at the places where we haven't invested, we're really trying to look at the places where we could be investing. And youth violence prevention is one of the key places that we see real opportunity for change.
Now, I'm curious to know what are your thoughts on the mayor's or the city or just like the overall system's response to this issue, and what actions do you believe should be taken to address the crisis?
I think that's a really important question. Um, so, what I would say is we really need to be talking, focusing, highlighting on intimate partner violence and highlighting the fact that there are communities where people don't feel safe when they go home. For me, if I feel unsafe walking through the streets of New York City, I can go home, I can close my door, I can pull down my shades, and I am safe. And that is a privilege that not everybody gets to experience here. And that is something that we really need to center in conversations about public safety. I think there's a lot of talk, um, and this is writ large, not just here in New York, but there's a lot of talk about public safety as a community experience, and that is true. But it's also a family experience, and we're not talking about how families experience or do not experience safety. And again, I think the answer is really letting empowering communities to lead these discussions and then driving investment in solutions that we believe have the potential to make the greatest change. And so that's youth violence prevention. And URI has this incredibly innovative program, and there are other organizations who are doing this work, but we work with people who have caused harm. So these are, people who have been, in some cases, convicted of a crime related to domestic violence, and we work with them to help them take accountability for their violent behavior, but also um, to understand what the underpinnings of that violence was. Why did you respond to a stimulus with violence? And in many cases, what we found is that they've experienced trauma themselves. They've experienced violence at home, community violence, you name it. And so addressing that violence, naming it, working through it, and providing people who have caused harm with the tools to navigate stressful or triggering situations has the potential to prevent future harm or at least reduce it. And so it's investing in programs before the violence starts, that we think has the real potential to make the greatest impact.
Now, I want to know, how can the city better collaborate with organizations like your own that are doing the work to ensure that survivors have the support that they need to escape and recover from violent situations? And I ask this because I noticed just throughout life, maybe in college classes, people will say that they will report things, but they don't really get the response. They don't get that encouragement that they need. And that sometimes people will just brush it off. And these are people that are supposed to help them. So how can how can the city better collaborate with organizations like yours to ensure that this doesn't really happen again?
I mean, we can and we do sit around tables and talk about solutions and work through where these communities are and what causes it. But I think your question raises a really important point, and it's that the communities who are the hardest impacted need to feel safe. They need to feel like if they are at risk, if they are in a violent or potentially violent situation, that they can call for help and that help will come. And many of these communities have in many cases, well-placed mistrust of law enforcement and do not feel safe reaching out for help when they are confronting family violence. And so I think for us, it is naming that, it is talking about it, and it is figuring out how to broach that gap, and how to train law enforcement to better respond to domestic violence calls, and how to help communities feel like when they are in this situation that they can reach out for help. It's all about building that trust.
And I love that your organization kind of looks at the intersectionality of the entire situation, because I've learned that, maybe for a Black woman, calling the cops because, she's experiencing IPV could mean that her partner is harmed now. And a lot of women are afraid of that. Same with maybe other places where, maybe they're a family of immigrants and people are afraid that that could, cause harm to the family. So I truly appreciate that your organization is like looking at these different blocks and looking at the entire picture instead of just looking at domestic violence on its own, because I think that's the best way to help people. Can you talk a little bit more about, how your organization kind of looks at some of those things and points out the intersectionality, and and what training goes into that to ensure that people who have the right mind and who want to help kind of look at those situations?
I think these are some of the most important questions, and I'm just so grateful for you to ask them. I think one of the biggest points of intersection that we found outside of race and cultural identity is also housing. I would say that I wouldn't just say it is the case that domestic violence is one of the leading causes, drivers of homelessness in the city. And right now, more than 40% of families who are in the family shelter system for people experiencing homelessness are there because they experience domestic violence. And so this is a really important conversation to be having at a time when conversations about homelessness have really they've they're everywhere at this point. And I think we really need to highlight the fact that addressing homelessness means that we are also addressing domestic violence. That if we address one of these issues, we will have an impact on the other one. Housing instability and violence at home go hand in hand.
Now, in your opinion, what role does the media play in raising awareness about intimate partner violence? Because I think that that's really important. Even what we do here is a part of the media, and that's why we want to bring on voices like yours. So can you just talk about, what role do you think the media plays in addressing the issue, and possibly like kind of creating these ideas that we have around domestic and intimate partner violence?
I think it is one of the most critical roles. I think the media has the potential to not simply elevate the issue with the public and with policymakers, but also to reframe the narrative around intimate partner violence. I think a lot of people think that what happens behind the closed doors of somebody's home is their business. And it is not our problem as a community, as a people to address, and it is. I think that there is still so much stigma around intimate partner violence, and I think that causes so many people who are experiencing violence to stay in a dangerous situation. And I think the media is one of the most incredibly powerful tools that we have to reframe and reshape that narrative and to empower survivors.
Now, can you let everybody know where they can go to, learn more information? Maybe they know someone who needs help. What can people do right now to kind of combat this?
So that is a fantastic question. I think two of the most important things are um, that if you are in a dangerous situation, there is information available to you. So you can visit URI's website. It's urinyc.org. You can also call the New York City Hope Line, the hotline, excuse me. And this is a place where if you are experiencing violence and need somewhere safe to go, you can call and they will help place you in a safe location. And that the national number is 1-800-799-7233.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me and having this discussion and educating our community, and doing the necessary work it takes to kind of end the stigma, but also find solutions to help, these very vulnerable communities. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for uplifting this issue. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Likewise. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back after this.
The ability to have my show during this time is helpful because I can stay connected with my friends, still interview people, and share my content.
Welcome back. Echoing Green empowers almost 1,000 leaders to launch impactful social enterprises, providing them with the necessary support and networks to reshape systems for a fairer society. The Inner City Green Team is a sustainable and scalable recycling initiative located within NYCHA, prioritizing job creation and environmental protection. Here now joining me is the founder of the Inner City Green Team, Brigitte Charlton-Vicenty. Brigitte, thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you.
Now, how has Echoing Green been instrumental in supporting and nurturing emerging social entrepreneurs?
When I say Echoing Green and think Echoing Green, they were the first fellowship entrepreneurs, the fellowships that support entrepreneurs. They were the first ones that took the chance on Inner City Green Team, and they say it's harder. It's harder to get in Inner City Green Team. I mean, in Echoing Green, than it is to get in Harvard. The application process is strenuous and challenging, and being part of the cohort and having membership there is it just makes me so proud. It's not just this fellowship, is that they support us, of course, financially and with resources, but most of all, they support the person, and um, and largely focuses on our well-being to make sure we're good to be in those trenches, mentally and spiritually, to do this work.
Well, I love that you talked about like how they say that it's harder to get into this program than Harvard. So with that, I want to say congratulations for, kind of making that step. Now, as a fellow, how has it shaped your approach to sustainability and community development?
It's just a soft place to fall when you have organizations that support your work and believe in your work just as much as you do. It's so validating uh, to have that type of support, and it helps me continue the work without so much continue to work in and not feel like I'm alone.
Now, could you share more about the mission and goals of the Inner City Green Team and its impact on the community?
Well, Inner City Green Team's mission is to cultivate environmental awareness, create green collar jobs, and improve civic engagement in NYCHA communities. We've really, our priority is to provide collar jobs for NYCHA for NYCHA residents, and to really provide a system of behavior change activities, and just empower residents to know that they can do something. Some people feel like, they hear so much about the environment and they feel like they can't do anything, but we provide the education, and we have outreach programs that really let residents know and feel that they can be impactful in the communities where they live.
Now, I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I wanted to talk about uh, basically how does the organization uh, basically take a unique service-based approach and contribute that to behavior change and increase recycling rates.
Right. So one of the what we call our white glove service is the door-to-door recycling collection. We provide recycling collection services for residents on a weekly basis. We give them recycling kit with bags, green and blue bags, and literature to reinforce the behavior. And on a weekly basis, we go to their door to collect the recyclables. And a lot of residents are just really engaged in this when they see how it's really a simple process, and we make it simple and convenient. And uh, we say that you can recycle in your underwear because you just put your materials in the bags that are provided, and you just set it out on a day that is scheduled. So people don't feel intimidated or feel like they don't know what they're doing because we're always there to reinforce the behavior.
Now, I understand that for NYCHA, recycling rates have been historically low. How do you address the challenges faced by NYCHA in increasing recycling participation?
We again with the outreach, we have a outreach program, and that is the way we meet residents where they are. It takes funding to do this, and we ask for the support of the city, and the ultimate goal is to be part of the city's waste management budget. So it's consistent outreach, outreach. It's like we have a family there now. We've been there since July 2021, and I've made some really good friends, and it's just the community is really open and accepting to this. So we do our part, and they are doing their part, and we have to continue to just keep working on other residents that may not be interested in doing it, but eventually through our green ministry is what I call it. Through our green ministry, that's where we're here to convert minds and body to have more greener thoughts.
And I think that's amazing because I think that for a lot of people, especially people who may live in apartment buildings, they don't really think about recycling, or it's just something that that happens that the other people do. Maybe in your own experience, is this something that you like tell your friends about, your family about? Like, do you feel that like you kind of because of this work that it kind of extended into other circles?
Oh yes, they know. They try to tease me, but it's like they know I'm doing the right thing. But I get teased about it a lot. It's like, okay, oh, here come the recycling lady. Don't you put that in there? Don't you make sure you know? So it just overflow. It's just it's who I am. I've been an environmentalist since I was a little girl when I discovered when I was brought to upstate New York to see the foliage and just the magnificence of all this beauty. It just took me, and I always wanted to protect. So, yeah, I get teased for it, but it's I could take the jokes. I can take it.
And I love that this is being brought to a community like NYCHA, because I think that there are so many people that probably care, but maybe they just don't think they have the resources, or it's something that they don't really need to do. So I love that you're kind of bringing that energy and that spirit to that community. Now, what challenges did you face in advocating for the right to recycle, and how did you overcome them to create and bring positive change?
It was a challenge. We've been at this since 2011. We've been established since 2011. So um, it was a lot of pushback, at the administration at the time. I've always seemed to be way ahead of my time when it comes to my ideas, and they just weren't ready. Although recycling had been the law since 1989, there just was no solution uh, uh, put into trying to solve the recycling issue. We were thought to believe that we were recycling because there were bins that were placed out there, but my moment of obligation when I realized that the recycling was being thrown in the trash, and I wanted to know why, and it's just took on a life, and through perseverance and insistence and trying to get my program implemented, here we are.
Now, I want to highlight, we're talking about being green, and another green that the organization helps with is, helping people make money and actually like create jobs, which is so important because I think that regardless of what you do, whether you like it or not, everybody needs to make a living. And your organization actually helps with that. So can you talk a little bit more about that effort and how you actually, help to create jobs for NYCHA residents?
Well, the idea, the proposal initially was to find an easy, convenient way for residents to recycle, and why not, hire niche residents to do that. So with the door to door, it's it's been a great and approachable strategy to to help build up the program. The residents, we have 5 NYCHA residents on our team, and they do recycling outreach, and then they also they do the collection. So as we continue, it's that's our goal. That's part of our mission to hire NYCHA residents to address the high um, unemployment rates in NYCHA, and also get them possibly they'll be social, entrepreneurs in the future. But this is again part of the mission, and how we let me say how we can prevent agencies from saying no. Like, well, look at all of these wonderful benefits. How can you say no to this, and why would you say no?
Now, how does this actually create community empowerment? And I want to like take it a little bit further and also like kind of boost the morale of living in certain neighborhoods, because I think that when we talk about certain neighborhoods, there's always a stigma associated within, and people have these ideas that they think people who live in these areas have. How does it actually encourage people to kind of have a little bit more pride or feel a little bit just more empowered in their community?
People feel like they can do something about it. It's just the opportunity is given to them. A lot of the time since I was growing up, there were a lots and lots of resources, that probably was the reason why I am the person that I am today, that were in these communities. So when being able to provide something like this to a community that doesn't to other New Yorkers that don't even get this service, to be able to provide this white glove service to residents, that encouraged them to say that somebody cares, someone's out there fighting a good fight, and are concerned about our issues as well.
Now, you and the Inner City Green team have received recognition for your work, including winning the NYC and CoLab Challenge. How have these acknowledgments impacted this team's work and mission? And, can you also talk about what motivates you, or does this motivate you to keep going?
Absolutely. It's just putting in my efforts. The NYCX Collab Challenge was the initial competition that helped us implement the pilot at Brownsville, Brooklyn, at the Brownsville houses in 2018. So we had there was a rapid response. Residents responded, and it was well received. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so can you just talk about how have this acknowledgement just impacted your work, and how it also just motivates you to keep going?
Yes, validation is everything. Recognition is everything. We did win the collab challenge, that helped us pilot the program to prove that this could work, and it did work, and it was very successful. And of course, getting being in these fellowships with Echoing Green, the Canal Foundation, and a few more. We just received another award from the Northeast Recycling Council, and received another award a couple of weeks ago as a community hero. So it just lets us know, like, you're doing a good job. Don't stop. Keep it up. We're here for you. And it's anything that you need. It's like we're here to support you. So like with anyone, just knowing that you have a soft place to fall keeps me going.
Well, I also want to say congratulations on just having your work being received well from, your peers and, people who are looking at it. I think that's amazing. Now, you've accomplished so much. What are your future aspirations for the organization?
Well, of course, to expand to all NYCHA developments, increase, the employment rates for NYCHA residents, and to, find other ways to increase our revenue streams. We currently are participating with a plastic salvage company where our materials are processed. We collect and process the materials, and we sell them back to them. It's very important to try to, be sustainable in this nonprofit world. So the whole idea is to be able to collect many materials, not just metals, glass, plastic, or cardboard. We want to create a zero waste system where we're removing everything. There's a place for everything. There's a place for it to go. The e-waste, which is against the law to dispose of in New York City. Those are the televisions and electronic products, and also textiles, and down to batteries, corks, whatever that comes across us, comes across to us. We know that there's a place for it to go, and if there's no place, then it must go to the landfill. We know we tried everything to make sure that it could be reused, repaired, recycled.
So, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. I feel like it also inspired me to do a little bit more in regards to just being more sustainable and eco-friendly, because I think a lot of us, we want to be that way, and sometimes it could feel overwhelming along with all the things that we do in life. But I will say that I was inspired definitely to look a little bit more, in that it doesn't matter like where you're from or like what's around you, like you can kind of make that difference. So I want to thank you so much for joining us and talking about it. And I also love that you said this was something that you always liked, even since you were like, a little girl. So thank you so much for sharing your story and kind of encouraging and inspiring our community to do a little bit more for our planet.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. The more, people talk about my baby, I must be doing something right.
So thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. Take care. Stay green.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Without BronxNet, I don't know how we'd be able to showcase the important and amazing talents that we have here at the Bronx. We've been able to feature lots of great artists, performers, people who deal with coffee and small entrepreneurship businesses, discuss controversial topics, and also be able to share the voice of residents that might not normally have access without a place like BronxNet.
Hey everyone, it's your girl Kat from the Kitty Rose Lifestyle, also from The Next Chapter, where we discuss shades of gray every week right here at BronxNet, Saturdays at 11 p.m. Wow, 30 years. 30 years of BronxNet public access television. I'm a girl from Brooklyn and came to the Bronx 25 years ago, started my journey on BronxNet on public access television in 2016, and BronxNet is where I got my start. BronxNet, I feel like, is a home away from home. They support all of my endeavors, and I wouldn't have been able to be on any of the other channels if it wasn't for the fundamentals that I learned right here at my start here at BronxNet. So I am so appreciative. My son says I should stop telling people I'm from Brooklyn because I've been here now, Bronx Strong, for 22 years. So I'm so grateful, and I wish you much success in 30 years, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30 more, because public access is necessary so that people like myself can have a voice. Yes, BronxNet, it's your girl Kat from Kitty Rose. Check me out every Saturday at 11 p.m. right here, Channel 68, The Next Chapter, where we discuss shades of gray. Mwah.
Welcome back. New York City Mayor Eric Adams vetoed a key provision of the How Many Stops Act, which mandated a thorough record of all civilian stops and investigative encounters by the New York City Police Department. The New York Civil Liberties Union, renowned for championing civil liberties and rights, is actively engaged in leading this dialogue. Here now joining me is the Assistant Director of the Policy at the New York Civil Liberties Union, Michael Sisitzky. Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, can you elaborate on Mayor Adams' recent veto of a critical component of the How Many Stops Act?
Sure. So earlier in January, Mayor Adams vetoed Intro 586 of the How Many Stops Act. This was a common sense transparency measure to require more comprehensive and accurate collection of data on just who's being stopped by the NYPD across the city. This was a measure that passed the city council back in December of 2023, and that was opposed by the mayor, vetoed by the mayor. And I'm very pleased to say last week the city council convened to override that veto and force this measure into law. So notwithstanding the mayor's objections, this is about to come into effect, and we will still be able to get the full scope of data that we wanted all along to know just who's being stopped by the NYPD.
Now, what implication, did this decision have for police transparency and accountability in New York City?
So this is establishing the baseline level of information that the public deserves and needs to know in order to examine the impact of police practices on communities across the city. So, for years we've been getting data on the NYPD's use of stop and frisk. And we know that there have been really horrific racial disparities in terms of who was targeted under those policies. But we also know that that was really just the tip of the iceberg. There are entire categories of police investigative and enforcement encounters that weren't included in that stop and frisk data, and that we didn't know what the disparities looked like at these so-called level 1 and level 2 stops. How many people are being approached by officers? How many people are being interrupted on their days, asked to produce identification, asked to consent to a search? What are the demographics of those people who are targeted? What communities experience them the most? So this is giving us baseline information to know just how many stops are actually taking place around the city and closing off loopholes to make sure that we're not letting the NYPD get away with undercounting and underreporting the amount of stop activity that's actually taking place.
Now, what steps do you believe are necessary to pretty much improve this overall, just this idea of having transparency with the New York Police Department?
So it starts with getting data on what enforcement looks like, what stop activity looks like. And that was really the reasoning behind the How Many Stops Act all along, was just to know the scope of what New Yorkers actually experience on a day-to-day basis. And this, is not a new concept. This grew out of a longstanding call from communities that goes, further back to the stop and frisk litigation from 2013, when the NYPD's policies were found unconstitutional. It goes back further than that, to be frank. But there was a real call from communities to know and have access to information on what officers are actually up to, who they're approaching, what reasoning they have to stop and approach New Yorkers, ask them questions, so that we can then engage in real oversight. Once you have information on who's being stopped and why, you can start to look for patterns. You can start to look for trends. You can expose and respond to racial profiling, racial disparities in enforcement. You can see the reasons why officers are stopping people, and you can start to question, do officers actually have a valid reason? Are the encounters that they're engaging in, is that something that actually makes sense for a police officer to do? Or are they engaging people in ways that could be better addressed through other interventions, non-police interventions, investments in communities? So it sets us up to actually understand just what the NYPD does, what their impact is, what harms they cause in communities, and how can we better tailor our responses as a city to meet people's needs that don't involve contact with a police officer or the criminal legal system.
Now, can you discuss the specific challenges faced by Black and Brown New Yorkers and how the How Many Stops Act addresses them?
So, one thing that we have long seen from stop and frisk data and from data on other types of police enforcement encounters is that overwhelmingly, NYPD enforcement activity targets Black and Brown communities at rates that are wildly out of proportion to their population and far higher levels than white New Yorkers experience policing. So we see this in terms of still more than 90% of the people being stopped and frisked by the NYPD being Black and Brown, 90% of those who are searched or arrested during a vehicle stop are Black or Latinx. And we expect that we will see a lot of these same disparities emerge in the types of reports that we get from the How Many Stops Act. So this is something where the NYPD has long targeted communities of color really aggressively with their stop activity. They've targeted them overwhelmingly for low-level enforcement. This administration has really prioritized a return to so-called broken windows policing, focusing on so-called quality of life offenses, things like having an open container of alcohol in a park, unlawful presence in a park after the hours have closed for the park. The types of things that really don't merit a real police criminal legal system response. But overwhelmingly, the people who are targeted, the people who suffer from those enforcement activities, are Black and Brown New Yorkers. And those are patterns that, to us, evidence a clear sense of bias, a clear sense that these communities are being, in particular, singled out for aggressive surveillance, aggressive enforcement, in ways that are frankly wrongheaded. So when we have access to this data, we can identify what that impact looks like. We can identify the trends in who's being targeted for bias-based policing, who's being profiled against, and we can, again, work to challenge those discriminatory patterns and hopefully replace them with interventions that are not grounded in criminalization and that are actually meeting communities' needs.
I'm really glad that you talked about like having, access to this information because it lets you notice patterns. But I think also, what your organization also works towards is like what comes next. So I'd really like to know what changes would you or your organization like to see in the handling of officer misconduct cases. And, I also want to touch on the fact that you mentioned that some of these, I guess, offenses are like very, just like things that a lot of people do, honestly, maybe just hanging out at the park, doing certain things that's just maybe something that teenagers do or something that young people do. They just want to hang out at night, but it's being criminalized. So knowing this information, what do you hope to see in the handling of, situations like this?
Yeah, and on that last point, I think the way that people experience policing is wildly different. I will acknowledge, I am a white man. I have not experienced police interactions the same way that a young man of color would. I've never had the situation that has, been, conveyed to me from a lot of the communities that we work with, that, a group of teenagers could just be hanging out, on the corner and have officers approach them and start immediately asking, what are you doing here? Where are you going? Where are you coming from? Those are just experiences that vary so wildly across demographics. I'm reminded of earlier in the pandemic when officers were handing out masks to white sunbathers in the West Village while aggressively enforcing social distancing restrictions on a group of teenagers of color in the East Village, and actually arresting and summoning people. The experiences are so different, the disparities are so stark. So, when we can expose these patterns of discrimination, when we can really get at the root of police misconduct, of police abuse, we can start to put pressure on the systems to actually hold them accountable, which is, to be clear, a much longer fight, and it's a fight that we've been engaged in for some time. We have examined police discipline and misconduct records and found that the systems that are in place for responding to officer misconduct are woefully inadequate. But that gives us the tools that we need once we have that data to start advocating for systems that actually move some of those levers of accountability into agencies or bodies that actually make sense and are actually committed to real accountability, which is not something that we see from the NYPD or this administration. So it really is about giving us data to challenge those systems, to push for something better, and to also look for alternative investments. So I think one thing that we have long called for is a rethinking of just how much we invest in terms of our limited city resources into a policing system, into a criminal legal system that is perpetuating harms without actually addressing root causes of problems in communities. So one thing that we hope to see is less of a default reliance on policing as our go-to response to every societal ill, and more investments in things like social services, healthcare, housing, the types of supports that actually enable communities to thrive and actually meet people's needs where they are.
Now, the NYCLU is working to reduce arrest and incarceration rates. How does criminal justice reform tie into the broader goals of ensuring fairness, equity, and justice in New York City's overall legal system?
And I mean, I tend to default towards the term criminal legal system instead of criminal justice system because, frankly, the system that we have right now, with all of the disparities inherent in it, doesn't really reflect a true vision of justice. We focus so much on an approach that again responds to issues with policing, with criminalization, thinking that we can arrest our way out of whatever problem we happen to be facing on a given day. And the result ends up being a system where our jails and prisons become overcrowded, become filled with people who frankly have no business being there. They don't have needs that can be met by a criminal legal system. They are systems that don't actually treat root causes. They are there to just warehouse people. And that is not a system that is based on fairness. That is not a system that is based on actually improving society or achieving any measure of fairness or justice. It is, we work towards reforms to the criminal legal system because we recognize that the system as it is really just a harm perpetuation system. It is not meeting people's basic needs for housing, for healthcare, for mental health care. Those are the types of interventions that we can actually address and, again, improve the quality of life for the individuals who are currently swept up in that system and, frankly, improve the quality of life for New Yorkers overall. We have a more fair and more just society when we are actually treating the root causes of issues and not simply relying on the criminal legal system to somehow be the catch-all solution to everything.
Now, not everyone has access to lawyers with sufficient resources. How does this lack of access impact the fairness of trials, and what initiatives does NYCLU advocate for to address this issue?
So, the value, and I'm, a bit biased as a lawyer, but the value of a lawyer in going through these systems, having access to counsel is really critical to navigating systems that are, by design, very hard to work your way through if you don't have an understanding of legal rules and procedures. So, the NYCLU has long supported efforts to ensure better funding and better conditions in terms of, caseload, workload, for public defenders to make sure that people are given counsel who can adequately represent them and have a real shot at giving them a fair shake at coming out of the criminal legal system with some modicum of justice. It's an area where we have advocated for reforms to the broader kind of procedural functions of the criminal legal system to ensure that criminal defendants are able to navigate those systems with access to the evidence that is being presented against them in terms of criminal discovery, that they are not held unduly and for undue lengths of time in jail pre-trial, and that they have an actual shot of still maintaining their lives and maintaining contact with their lawyers and other support systems while they're awaiting prosecution. So there are a number of efforts that we've done to try to ensure that that people are able to get as much assistance as they need and are entitled to in order to make these systems operate a bit more fairly. And yes, that does include making sure that people are adequately supported by counsel who have the resources, the time, and the access to the tools and evidence that they need in order to have a real shot at mounting the criminal defense to which all New Yorkers are entitled.
Now, in light of the mayor's actions, I want to discuss, what are some ways that the community can be more actively engaged in these types of discussions? Because I think that oftentimes when things like this happen, unfortunately, and there's so many reasons why, but the communities most affected don't even realize these things are happening, and how they can affect them. So, until it happens. So, can you talk about ways that the community can be just a little bit more engaged in these discussions?
Sure. So, there were a lot of conversations with community organizations and some town halls that we tried to with partners pulled together to let people know about what was going on with the How Many Stops Act, how they can get engaged. I think real ways are just engaging with some of the organizations and community-based organizations that exist in neighborhoods and in communities across the city, getting involved in organizing, getting involved in some of the groups that are on the ground that are directly responding to community concerns and needs as they relate to public safety. And one thing that any New Yorker can do is whenever there is a proposal as it relates to something like the How Many Stops Act or any bill that relates to policing issues or really any issue, what have you, folks should be engaging with their city council offices, reaching out to council members, reaching out to community boards, and making sure that their perspective is heard, that their views are heard. One thing that I think was really impactful throughout the campaign to get these bills enacted was hearing directly from New Yorkers who were joining rallies, joining press conferences, calling city council offices, and saying, this was my experience with an NYPD stop, how I experienced harassment or mistreatment in this case, and how transparency and some measure of oversight could have helped address and prevent some of the abuses that occurred. So really just not being afraid to reach out to city council offices directly, to reach out to officials in the community and make sure that their voices are heard and that their perspectives are centered and valued in these campaigns. Because at the end of the day, it really, what moves people are hearing from the direct personal experiences of New Yorkers who experience police harassment and abuse day to day.
Now, what can people do to learn more about the NYCLU and possibly even use some of the resources that the organization provides?
Sure. So folks can visit our website, nyclu.org, follow us on various social media channels at NYCLU. And I would also, on our website, we have various ways to sign up for lists to take action on issues related to policing, criminal legal system issues, immigration issues, education. We have kind of a full range of topics that we tackle as an organization. I would also encourage folks to look at the website and social media of some of our partners as well. We do a lot of this work alongside a coalition called Communities United for Police Reform, and their website is changethenypd.org. And this was the campaign that really coordinated and helped ensure that this measure went through, helped bring more than 100 organizations into the fold and supporting the How Many Stops Act, and is a great resource for other ways to get involved in pushing for real police transparency and accountability in New York City.
All right, well, Michael, I want to thank you so much for joining me and educating our community.
Very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We've come to the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx social justice and anti-violence forums. To rewatch this week's edition, you can catch the recable cast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, you can visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week as we continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Kibin. Take care.